Hello, and welcome to Why We Podcast. It's the show where attorneys and accountants, coaches, and consultants share how their show helps. We stream live Fridays, noon Eastern. You can go to videosocials.net/watchwwp for Why We Podcast, and you can watch it there. But it streams live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and you can watch prior episodes, of course, on YouTube. Just do a search if you're not on the channel. And all the major podcast platforms, you can subscribe and download and all that good stuff from Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts. My name is Vik Rajan. I will be your host. I am also the co-founder of Video Socials. We are a video blogging and podcast promotion community for those kinds of folks, lawyers, accountants, coaches, and consultants. Speaking of consultants, today we have Steve Fretzin of Be That Lawyer. And I'm looking forward to hearing why Steve has his podcast. And the reason why we do this podcast is threefold, really. For those of you in the audience, you may already have a podcast, and not only will this be inspirational, but more than the rah-rah, this is going to be informative of what else can you do with your show to either monetize it, to expand your visibility, the impact, and even profitability of your show. If you've been thinking about hosting your own show, we'll start talking about that too, and you'll learn about other resources to help you start your show. Or if you're looking to be a guest on other people's podcasts, you'll learn how to do that too, and how to be a great guest, and why a show host would want to interview you, and how to kind of put that best step forward. I also want this to be a showcase for our guests, like Steve, for him to go into those details to provide that inspiration and information around why we podcast. And quite frankly, self-serving, people get to know Video Socials through these podcasts. So I implore everyone out there, they should have their own video interview podcast, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit, before we even go into your podcast, tell us a little bit more about your consulting firm.
Yeah, so I started being a sales coach and trainer back in 2004, primarily working with entrepreneurs and focused in the professional services arena. And I never really thought I would work with lawyers. I just didn't have any lawyer clients. And then 2008 hit with the recession, and some of my very successful clients started referring lawyers to me because my whole process is a very non-salesy process. I'm actually teaching people how to not sell and how to be much more consultative and better listeners and better questioners and qualifiers. So I started working with attorneys, and it just blew up within 2 years. About 85-90% of my business was working with lawyers and law firms.
Yeah.
And I just pushed my chips into the middle, and I said, look, I'd rather be a big player in a small, industry, which is not a small industry, but compared to being, a small player with everybody, a generalist, exactly. And that's what it's been going on since about 2008 or 9.
That's a good amount of time.
Yeah.
And forgive me, I didn't really catch it. How did you fall into that microcosm of legal coaching, of lawyer coaching? How did your first initial lawyer clients come to you? Like, what was that about?
Yeah. So I'm working with entrepreneurs, mainly CEOs of small businesses, and they are talking with their attorneys, and the attorneys are saying, geez, the phone hasn't been ringing and things have been slow. And how am I going to feed my people, billable hours?
Right.
And they said, well, I worked with a sales coach who really helped me get to another level. I think he might be good for you. And they said, really, there's someone that does that, a sales coach? Like, lawyers don't know that that's even a thing.
Sure.
Because for many years, they never really had to do any sales or business development.
Right.
And so once they got in touch with me, we sat down, I evaluated their gaps. And here's the most interesting thing I'll tell you. When I was working with salespeople and entrepreneurs, it's like a whiteboard that has scribbles all over it. And for me to coach people and teach them something new, I'd have to erase all that to put a new, process on the board. Lawyers had no process. They were like open books. Like, it was just a whiteboard that was clean, and everything that I wrote on the board, if they did it, they'd get results. So it was a really great fit. I just didn't know that it existed until I knew.
So that that blank slate, that clean slate, was that, I guess it sounds like it was helpful because you didn't have to literally erase or rewind. You were able to kind of build it from scratch, and instead of having to like break bad habits and clean up bad
Yes.
disorganization, it was, as long as they were open and willing, which of course they hire you for that reason. It's like, all right, here it is. They, I hate to say they don't know any better, but they don't know any different. They don't know the bad habits or
Yeah.
anything. Was there
They
any
hadn't
kind of
they hadn't
pushback?
been through like multiple trainings. They
Yeah,
hadn't been, not brainwashed, but like, when you go through 3, 4, 5 different types of trainings, different companies as a salesperson coming up, an entrepreneur coming up, and they're all good. It's
yeah,
not that there's bad ideas so much. They're all, workable, but times have changed. I mean, people are still selling the way they did 20, 25 years ago, and it's not appropriate. Like nobody wants to be convinced or pushed into a sale.
right.
People want to make their own decisions based on the information that it's in front of them, and
Yeah,
understand that there's a win-win solution here. And
right.
that's what they weren't understanding.
Was there any pushback? I mean, now a lot of attorneys who are in their own practice or principal of a firm, sell is not a four-letter word anymore. And selling, they get it. They can put it in context and they can translate it to what it means for them. Did you need to translate it to something more palatable, like client development, rainmaking,
Yeah.
etc.? Did you have to use the euphemism, or you went straight for the jugular
I
into
mean,
that?
I'm gonna tell you the most extreme example that
Yeah.
the company that I started in 2004 was called Sales Results Inc. I mean,
Okay.
sales results with an arrow going up like that. I mean, it couldn't have been more aggressive and results. And
Yeah.
if you're a
Yeah.
driver, like, for entrepreneurs, right? That was
Sure.
what they wanted to see. And that's what I
Right.
was providing was those results. And I had a client on the train, a lawyer client on the train. He goes, I'm kind of afraid to pull out your materials on the train because it's just so aggressive and salesy and everything. He says, I'm just telling you this because I think, the legal community might agree. So I asked around, and sure enough, yeah, everybody was kind of put off by the word sales and by the name, by the aggressiveness of my green and blue, logo. And so I said, you know what? I'm kind of the business. I'm really what everything revolves around. Why don't I just make it my name? So we changed it to Fretzin Inc.
All
Pretty
right.
simple. And then, of course, Be That Lawyer is my brand. That's what I promote. And what people know me for is Be That Lawyer, the lawyer that everyone's talking about because they're killing it on the business development front. And so instead of sales, we say business development. Lawyers know that it's sales. They just prefer it because they're little, gentle snowflakes.
Well, and yeah, it's yeah. Well, there you go. You tell it like
Who
it
I
is.
happen to love. It's all good.
Yeah, with all love. Yeah, I mean, I could see that where no one wants to feel, or salesy sounds like sleazy, but
Yeah.
that's really all it has in common, at least ideally. But there is that taboo out there of being a sales professional. I'm a sales professional, so I don't
Yeah.
have that. I guess that's how it is. But and nothing happens until the sale is done. So from that aspect, good for you that you were able to at least adapt. And then how did the moniker or the brand of Be That Lawyer happen? And is that the name of your show as well?
Yeah, so I have a very good friend who has been in the branding space for many years. He's the kind of guy who can walk down an aisle at a grocery store and identify good brands and bad brands and why. And so
Cool.
I asked for his help, and we came up with a bunch of different ideas about like what is my brand all about. And at the end
Sure.
of the day, I'm creating lawyer assassins, people that go out and just can create business at will because they have a methodology, a process to follow that's been proven out. And
Cool.
so we kind of said, like, these are the people that want to be that lawyer. They want to be the leader of their firm. They want to be the rainmaker that everyone's talking about at the water cooler. And we just agreed that while it is a little aggressive, Be That Lawyer, it really is what I'm creating. It's what I do every day, is helping to lawyers to be that lawyer. And we just agreed that it was a great tagline. And of course, now my daily law bulletin, Chicago Daily Law Bulletin column is Be That Lawyer. My podcast is Be That Lawyer, and it's the brand that I want to be recognized for because that's
Sure.
what I'm doing every day is helping lawyers to hit that moniker.
So when did you start the podcast, and why?
So the podcast started literally 2 years ago this month, and
All
I
right, congrats. So
kicking my
February of 2020.
yeah, and I'm
Yeah,
kicking
nice.
myself that I didn't do it 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I wake
it's
up every day.
it's yeah, I just can't believe how long I waited, and I just didn't realize what an opportunity
Right.
to build a brand, to add value in the marketplace, in the industry, to become a thought leader. And it's just been an amazing adventure so far. And I just, again, the biggest complaint I have is wish I had done it sooner, but it's been an absolute fabulous experience so far.
And what was the aha moment? Like, when and why did it be like, I should have a podcast? Like, what was going through your brain at that point? I mean, at this point, it's like very trendy. Everyone's got a podcast, whether you like him or not. People, you hear about it. You hear about it on the every journalist and thought leader and subject matter expert. At least it seems so, which is really not true. It's not that saturated, but it feels as if it's very trendy. It's in the zeitgeist now. But 2 years ago, not so much. That was essentially right before COVID hit. So good timing in that sense of having a virtual type show, if it is virtual. So talk to us about that. Like,
I think around 5 or 6 years ago, I did interview a bunch of managing partners with, microphones. I'd go into their office, pull out 2 mics, interview them, and put that up as like an audio blog or something like that. So I kind of had an idea that 2 things would happen. One is I would get great content to put out to the market from managing partners who can talk about how to make it rain, can talk about what's happening in the legal industry and how to what are they teaching their younger lawyers to do. And then the other piece of it was I got to meet managing partners that I never would have gotten to meet because they wanted to be interviewed. They were interested in that. And it was easier than saying, hey, do you want to meet with me to talk about my services? Right. So there was a dual benefit there, but I didn't really leverage it. And I really didn't know how to leverage it as well as I could have. And I kind of just gave up after about 20. So I got 20 and done and locked up.
It's a good number. I mean,
pretty good
statistically, number. For like podcasts, most people don't get to 20 episodes. It's a pretty sad statistic. So even though you weren't calling it a podcast, you didn't really, you didn't distribute it like a podcast, for all intents and purposes, raw material. Did you ever end up releasing it as like literally an Apple podcast or anything like that?
No, they were up on my website. Maybe they were up on YouTube or something. And that was really about it. And then one of my people I interviewed mentioned that she wanted me on her podcast. So I did her podcast and I said, by the way, who helps you set this up, produce it, et cetera? She introduced me to a podcast company that does the production, the editing, that could kind of show me not only how to do it, but also how to use it as a business development and marketing tool. And I was like, okay, so I did that. And so that's really what launched it. I wasn't comfortable on my own with all the different elements that I'm sure you work on every day. I wasn't comfortable as an individual, busy professional doing all that myself. But hey, if I can outsource it to someone like you that does all that, well then easy peasy.
It's why we have Sarah backstage right now to meet and greet you before I came on, and I could show up at showtime and kind of hand back the keys at the end of this half hour and know everything else gets done and I can go on to the next thing. It's tremendous. And not only Sarah, but she's got a great support staff as well at our company. But I totally know how you feel because it can get very overwhelming, which is kind of the reason why either people fizzle away with their show or never get started in the first place. It feels and sounds daunting, and it sort of is. So that was like the beginning, February 2020. And the concept was still the same, like you were doing 5-6 years ago, where you would interview managing partners, or talk to us.
No, it's opened up significantly. So it's really, I'm interviewing people in the legal industry that have something good to say. And so what I try to do is I try to do the interviews the same way, because I've written 4 books. I write articles all the time. I'm posting on social media all the time. And what I try to do is not talk at 20,000 feet, theory. I try to get down and give people tactical, actionable things that they can take away from a book, an article, a podcast, whatever, so they can actually make changes to what they're doing to make improvements. And so that was the theme of the show. So I'm interviewing someone who's an expert in legal technology. I'm interviewing an expert in legal marketing. Maybe they're not even in legal. Maybe they're someone that helps with fitness and nutrition. But lawyers have issues with depression and suicide and all this. Next to dentists, I think they're number 2. Like what can I bring to the table that's going to add value? And yes, I interview managing partners and I interview my clients and I interview tons and tons of people, but they all have something to say that's super valuable to the audience that's now listening.
And obviously it's relevant. The audience are attorneys predominantly, right? And how do you measure that kind of engagement where the audience is getting that value and benefit, where it sounds like it's a pretty comprehensive, it's not only just legal marketing anymore or business development in general, sales, but it's holistically, to use that word, for all these other aspects. I mean, being in that world, working with attorneys, I know that there are coaches for attorneys. There's not only time management and productivity, but like you mentioned, there's like that life work balance and other issues. And, then there are family and addiction issues and things that creep up because of the stress of the profession. So how do you measure, monitor? How do you know that the audience is benefiting?
I mean, there's a number of ways. One is, I watch my number of downloads every week to see how they're doing. Is it going up or is it going down? And it's been continually going up. So I know that I'm adding more people as I continue to add more shows. I'm actually doing 2 a week, which is a very aggressive number of shows to do. But I think that helps because the more shows you do, the more people you interview, the more content you put out there, the faster you can build a show. So doing 1 a month is very different than doing 2 a week.
Right. I mean, exponentially different. Yeah. Not to cut you off, but did you start off doing 2 a week, February 2020, or?
No, this is what happened. I ended up, I don't know if it's a victim of success or whatever, but I was doing 1 a week and I would have so many like in the tank, if you will, that I would say to you, if I'm interviewing you, Vikram, I'd say, "Oh, great interview. Thank you so much. This is going to air. We're in February. This is going to air in April." And you'd be like, "April? Like we're talking in February." So I had that many like done that I didn't feel comfortable telling someone that I just interviewed that this is going to happen in 3 months.
Right. And on the guest scheduling standpoint, it's very similar, right? It's like, "Oh, great. I'd love to have you on my show. Let's talk in April."
Yeah, exactly. So putting it off like that,
people forget it. It's really annoying. So you want to strike.
So the closest I've come down is there's been a point where like I just took a winter break vacation. I came back and I only had 3 shows in the tank, like done.
Right.
And I freaked out. I was like, "Oh," I'm like finally like catching, like this is catching up to me. And I'm back again where I've got another 10 in the tank, through the end of March. Like I'm already with 2 shows a week. So I'm getting enough traction where people are coming to me that want to be on my show. Also I'm meeting new people all the time. I'm doing a lot in the legal tech space. So there's a lot of really interesting legal tech out there that people want to hear about. So that's how I'm continuing to build the numbers. And I also get people that come to me that want to talk to me about my services. And I'll say, "How did you hear about me?" And they say, "Well, I heard you on Neil Tyra's podcast, or I heard you on this other podcast, or I heard your podcast. And it sounds like you know what you're talking about. So I thought we would check it out."
And so I want to get to that. There's like kind of the 3 aspects I did at the top of the show to remind everyone, right? It's like the benefit to the audience, benefit to the guests, and then benefit to you as the show host. To kind of rewind back to the benefit of the audience, has as someone like it mentioned right there, where it's a nice dovetail between kind of people coming out of the woodwork of your audience and then wanting to work with you. That's a nice confluence between they got benefit from the show, and then obviously you benefit as a practitioner yourself as a legal coach. Is there an example of that, where that literally has happened, where someone came out of the woodwork where you didn't really know them? They probably came to you through some other means. Maybe they found you on Apple Podcasts. They found you through a guest sharing the episode.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, I have a number of examples.
Oh, cool.
The one that I'll share is someone had heard my podcast through a friend and was listening to a number of episodes. And when he emailed me, he said, "I feel like I already know you. Like I've been listening to you. I feel like you're in the car with me when I'm driving and like you're a friend." Like, and then he talks, then when we actually got together and we had this conversation, he's like, "Yeah, you are just like, not like a performer or like someone that they've seen on TV, but you get a little bit of that." And I listen to podcasts too. So like, I feel like when I listen to Conan O'Brien, like I know his sense of humor better than I did years ago, because I wasn't like a huge fan of his show, but I love his podcast and I think it's hilarious. So that builds that instant, not only credibility, but also like they get my personality, they get my knowledge, my experience all from the show, not because I'm pitching on the show, but because the way I interview, the way I conduct myself and everything, it just gives you such a head start, even more than I found the books I've written. that
Yeah.
that they're getting my voice from the books, but not in the same way as literally hearing my voice and the
Right, right, right. I
conversations
was just
I'm
going to
having.
say that
Yeah,
figuratively in the book, but literally they're
yeah.
hearing you. Now, so is it exclusively audio or do you have a video version of the podcast?
So I'm doing an audio, and then only recently have I been taking like 2 or 3 minute clips, like the
Okay,
highlight reels from the
sure.
show, and then doing video clips and putting that on my YouTube channel. So
Okay.
that's a newer
A
thing.
newer phenomenon.
Yep.
And why? Is it because like the social media algorithms you want to tap into, basically?
I mean, there might be some algorithm. I think it's look, content is king when you're
Right.
running a business, whether you're a lawyer, you're a coach, you're a consultant,
Yep.
whatever, you know this.
Yep.
Everything you produce needs to be repurposed to get the most out of it. So the
Yeah.
podcast needs to be repurposed. I'm even like, I teach a class every week to
Yeah.
8 to 12 lawyers that
Oh,
come
nice.
every week to my class. I'm even taking clips of that where I'm talking about things about time management, about qualifying, these little snippets that all can be repurposed if you have someone doing it for you, because I'm not going to do it myself. I'm not an editor, right? So we have other people that do this kind of stuff, and then it's repurposed for social media, it's repurposed on YouTube, et cetera. And you just keep building that library up, and Google likes you.
Yeah, right. It's content, and it's different media for different. It's like different folks, different strokes, different media.
Yeah.
So some people like reading, some people like watching, some people like listening, or it's a time of day, it's a convenience. They're doing the dishes, they can't watch you, but they can listen to you. They're driving, obviously they can't watch you, but
Yep.
then they're in front of a screen, and it's much better to watch. It's much more engaging, even if you're doing these clips. Like a lot of our clients and members do essentially video blogs that are podcast promos. So it's like a 2-minute promo of their longer form podcast. I also like that concept that you're mentioning of repurposing, where I think of it as kind of top of the waterfall, where you can cascade that one video interview podcast into multiple forms of content, literally chopping it up, or like you were mentioning, in different media. Do you also transcribe it into a written read along version for, yeah?
I do, but it's not something that's like actively visible.
Okay.
It's really for behind the scenes for search engine optimization. So
Okay.
I
You
just
don't
figured,
release it.
no, I just, it's something that if you're putting out all that content and you've got, 2 30-minute interviews every
Right.
single week, and you transcribe those and put them on the back end of your website where the podcast is hosted. Wow. I mean, that's a lot of content. So I am getting found on Google a lot
Cool. Good.
more, than I used to, because
Why do you
all of
keep it
this. Yeah.
hidden? I don't know. Like, I'm just more curious. And is there a kind of strategic decision? Why are you keeping it hidden for only the Google bots to index versus anyone else to to find and copy paste and quote you in an email and refer you or something? Like, why not just include it as a blog? Was there like a reason?
No idea.
Okay.
No reason.
Okay.
This is a marketing decision my marketing team needs to think about and make. And again, if that's a big mistake and I'm learning something from you now that I should be doing, then boom,
Yeah, I mean, just
benefits me.
because, like, why not show it? Like, it's like there's no reason like only Google bots should see it, because if there's an opportunity, I always say this because we have a phone blogger as a service, which is turning telephone interviews into written articles,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, there's an advantage of written that video and audio doesn't have, which you can skim and find, literally control find, command F, find words and skim a lot faster than hunting for that section of a video. It's annoying to rewind and find a section of video, even on like Netflix and Amazon or YouTube. And so it's just as annoying on social media. And so we can skim and scan a 30 minutes worth of text heck of a lot faster. It's not as engaging. And for most of us, we will actually end up listening and watching, but it's supplemental material. I call it a read-along version, which is basically a transcription where you don't have to do a lot of editing. You don't want to do a lot of editing because you want it to be true to the original content. It's literally collateral in the real sense of supporting material. So you might want to consider just going public with it, because now you basically have a written blog.
My marketing agency is going to be getting a copy of this interview so they can
All
take
right.
care of it for me.
I'm looking forward to chatting with them because we're
There
in
you
that
go.
space, right? So maybe
Yep.
we can do something. So before we take a quick break, I would love for you to tell us. You talked to us a kind of the kind of guest you interview. Does it benefit them in any way? Have they seen any kind of benefit? Have they come back to you with any anecdotes where they've either got an inquiry or business or kudos even. Have you heard
Yeah.
anything from your guests of like that they're benefiting from being on your show?
Yeah, I mean, again, if as I mentioned, content is king, and now they're
Right.
getting a highlight reel of an interview
Cool.
where they're able
Yeah.
to demonstrate their expertise,
Right.
and it's done in a professional way, a well edited and
Yeah.
produced
Yeah.
way. They have that then to send out on social and to put on their website or whatever they want.
Cool.
And I'm not going to say I've got all these great stories of millions of dollars of business that's been transacted for them, but the commentary for them is this. Even just today, I released one with a gentleman who is an amazing attorney. He also wrote and produced a film that
Oh,
has
nice.
tons of awards. He's also a humanitarian, does a lot of cause for foster children. And him and his marketing team, they're going to take that interview and they're going to put it up on social. They're going to put it out there, and they're going to just continually enhance that individual's spotlight on
Yeah.
on the business, the law firm, and the movie production.
And what's that follow-up like with you? And of course, you have a marketing team that does a lot of that behind the scenes, backstage, and highly recommend that.
Yeah.
What's that follow-up in terms of asking your guests to share it, and do you ask them to give reviews or subscribe? Like, what is that follow-up process? Do you know how that works with your guests, and so that there is that
Yeah.
engagement?
So once we launch the podcast, I email them out to say, hey, look, it's live. I give them the link on my website to promote. So again, trying to get eyeballs back to my website versus just sending them to Apple. And then we give them the social media channels to repurpose all the posts that we do and everything else and get it. So again, just today, the lawyer just mentioned, his marketing team is on it. So they're putting it up on Facebook. They're putting it up on Twitter. They're putting it up on LinkedIn. They're reposting my post or whatever.
Cool. Right.
And so so it's getting out to my network. It's getting out to his network, his law firms. Everyone that's following his law firm is now seeing it. So that's what's going on. And it's again, it's all this exponential activity that's going on that you normally wouldn't have. And this is funny because I talk to podcasters who don't interview, and I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? Yeah. I'm like, are you sure you want to do that? And they're like, well, yeah. And here's why. And I go, okay. Cause they're kind of missing a lot of what I think gets you value out of a podcast. And they're doing their 20-minute stick every, teaching, whatever. That's okay. It's nice. It's content, but I don't think they're getting the juice out of the squeeze.
It's funny you say that, Steve, because, as much as I've had my podcast in various forms for years, we never really offered that as a service because we've always been in the blogging world. I mean, it's very much like, of course, looking back now, like you say, like you kick yourself like, why? And it's silly to us because we're a content marketing firm. Of course, we should be in the world of helping people with their podcasts, but literally until like the fall, we weren't really in that world until our members, who we call our clients members, came to us and needed help. Specifically, like, bits and pieces, stuff that they didn't want to do, all the annoying parts that that you don't like to do either. And so we started helping here and there. And then it dawned on me, that's silly. Like, why aren't we just putting this as a whole system and doing it for them and making it turnkey, which, people will hear about in the commercial. But my question in that is, if you can kind of go back and kind of think of all the steps that happens with, just from your guests, there's that difference between the video blog or any kind of long form writing and that difference between now you interviewing someone else. It's that cross promotion aspect, that multiplier aspect, you call it exponential, that kind of makes that separate. Now, do you also do other, thought leadership, like solo writing or solo blogs or anything like that? Or is it pretty much your podcast is your thought leadership platform?
No, I mean, I think the three other things, I mean, I do a ton of speaking, so that's out there right now. And I also write a monthly article for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, which I then flip over into my blog on my website. So I'm getting a little double dipping there.
Yeah.
And then I'm writing a lot on social media. So like, for example, I had an experience where I had to fire a client, and I would just rant about it, 4 or 5 paragraphs on LinkedIn. Right. It got, 7,000, 8,000 views and lots of comments because it was something that I wrote about that really struck home for people who realize when they have a difficult client that it's hard to fire somebody, but it's a good decision because, there's certain people you just shouldn't work with.
Right, right, right. It's not, if it's
So,
not a
so
good fit, it's
those
not a
kind,
good
yeah,
fit for
those
you.
kinds of posts do really well.
Yeah, good for you. We're going to take a quick break, quick commercial break. When we come back, obviously we want to hear a little bit more of how we can get a hold of you and where we can hear your podcast. I'd love for you to shine the spotlight on a podcast that you're a raving fan of, someone that you know really well that hosts a show. And I'd love for you to share why you are a fan of that podcast, of that show.
For sure.
Let's take a break.
Do you want your own podcast like this one? My team will do all the grunt work for you. Just show up, smile, and enjoy talking to your potential clients and referral relationships. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Are you a busy lawyer, coach, consultant like me? You should have a podcast done for you to get you more clients, impress your colleagues, and it becomes your perpetual referrals flywheel. We find you the right guests. We schedule your guests, handle all the podcast tech, get you into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and more. Done for you. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Now back to the show.
And back with my guest, Steve Fretzin. Steve, I know you are a fan of other people's podcasts. You're obviously, in addition to your own show, you're a guest on a lot of other people's podcasts. But is there a show that you're a raving fan of, and why?
Yeah, there's a few out there. The one that comes to mind is a friend of mine named Jared Correa.
Oh, yeah, sure. I know Jared.
You know Jared?
Jared's
Okay,
awesome.
a legal toolkit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll tell you 2 reasons why I love Jared. Number one is he's truly authentic. I mean, when you listen to his podcast, you really get to know him and some, and he's just such an interesting guy.
He's got a fun personality.
But he also has kind of made some decisions about the way he's going to run his podcast, the way he's going to mix things up. And what it does for me is it helps me generate fresh ideas about what I can do to change up mine. Because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want people to feel like they're hearing the same show over and over. And I know that's hard to avoid because that is the show. Like, it's an interview format and, whatever. And every time I have a guest, it's different. Yeah. However, I might mix it up where I was doing something called like the 3 best of, where I was asking them about their favorite restaurant in the city they're in, what they like to do, etc. Sure. And Jared, I mean, he has his mom on the show. Yeah. He talks about music. He talks about, he asked me questions about the Olympics. So he interviewed me like 2 years ago, I think, when I first started getting into this, and it was the Winter Olympics, or maybe it's just the regular Olympics actually. Sure. And so but he was asking me about, do I know of these weird sports that no longer exist in the Olympics? And it was just so fun. Like, so fun
segments of his show. So it's a crafted experience, not just an interview show.
Right.
So we're fans of Red Cave and Jared. So that's cool. That's great. Finally, how can people get a hold of you? How can people learn more about your consulting firm, your coaching practice? How can they listen to your show?
Yeah, the easiest way is you can find my show, Be That Lawyer, on Apple and all the other podcast channels. You can go to my website, fretzin.com. It's FRETZIN.com. And then lastly, I'm all over LinkedIn. So if you're interested in, checking me out there, just type in Steve Fretzin on LinkedIn. You can look at my 120 plus recommendations from lawyers that I've worked with. Again, real dramatic results is kind of what I go for with each client. So those are the best ways to reach me.
Cool. Well, this has been exciting. Thank you, Steve, for sharing why you podcast. This is great. Awesome. This has been another episode of Why We Podcast, where attorneys and accountants, coaches, and consultants share the benefits of their show to their audience, to their guests, and of course, to themselves. It's inspiration and information for you, for your podcast, your live stream, if you've been thinking about having one. If you like being a guest on other people's podcasts, once a month, we host a show host networking event. It's usually the last Thursdays of the month. You can go to videosocials.net/show hosts, plural video socials, plural show hosts, videosocials.net/show hosts. And you can RSVP there. And especially if you host your own podcast, it's great. You know what it takes to be a guest on other people's shows. However, if you're also a thought leader and a subject matter expert, you'll find the right type of shows, and you'll basically introduce yourself to dozens of other podcast hosts. Again, my name is Vik Rajan. We stream this live every week, Fridays at noon, and then eventually it gets on all the podcast platforms. Thank you so much for your reviews and your downloads, and we will talk to you next time about Why We Podcast. Talk to you then. Bye-bye. Thanks, Steve.